as people continue to trickle in, just a reminder, please feel free to if you have any questions, put them in the chat. So I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the session. And any that may be pertinent, I can answer them, or maybe I'll pause Gordon and allow him to answer. Alternatively, there'll be a couple that I think might be best for last. And so Gordon's going to try to reserve some time here at the end for some Q&A. So please feel free to be active in the chat. And with that, I hand it off to Gordon.
Thanks, Eduardo. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Glad to be here talking about one of my favorite topics, and that is fundraising, especially funding the early stages of your venture. As Eduardo said, my name is Gordon Doherty. I'm co-founder and president at Capital Factory. If you all are coming to us from Texas, especially from the greater Dallas-Fort Worth area, hopefully you know about Capital Factory. We refer to ourselves as a center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas. As president of Capital Factory, I spend most of my time aligned with our startup accelerator companies. I'm a very, very active advisor. I'm a partner with Josh Baer in our various venture funds, and Josh and I together have made more than about 250 investments as venture capitalists. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I get the benefit of seeing when fundraising campaigns go well, and unfortunately I have insights from fundraising campaigns that go poorly, and I want to bring to you some of the best practices and tips and tricks and hints that I've developed over the years and what I've witnessed over the years in this session. Now, I've only got about 30 minutes or so that I'm going to lecture because I'd love to leave about 15 minutes for your questions. I've published a lot of information about fundraising, and much of that is in a bunch of articles, more than 150 of them that I've published on a site called Shockwave Innovations, shockwaveinnovations.com. Not every article is fundraising, but the fundraising category is the most populated category of articles. So I hope you find some interesting things there. Last year, I kind of went crazy and I decided to write a book. It's the book on the left called Startup Success. The first volume, the subtitle is Funding the Early Stages of Your Venture. So it is an early stage fundraising book. I was excited that it reached a bestseller list on Amazon last year. And if you are about to run a fundraising campaign or you've just started one, if you decide to buy the book, I hope it brings you a lot of value. On the right is another must-have book for any fundraiser. It's called Venture Deals. It's in its third edition, at least third edition. I think that's still the latest one. But Brad Feld, the founder of Techstars, and his partner Jason Mendelson wrote a really good reference book. I'd call this kind of the technical equivalent to my book. My book is around planning, strategy, and execution of a fundraising campaign, whereas Venture Deals gets into the more details about the difference between common equity, preferred equity, cap tables, decoding term sheets, and things like that. So, you know, I'd like to think that these two books complement each other really well on this particular topic. So with that said, let's jump into it. You know, as I find fundraising founders, I always find that they're fundraising out of one of two reasons. They either want money or they need money. If they're raising money out of want, it means that they want to accomplish more faster. They want to shift a gear. They don't have to, but if they did, they could accomplish some interesting things faster than they otherwise could without the funding. If they're raising money out of need, it means that they need the money. In other words, they're facing a cash fume date in which the bank account is going to go to zero or negative. And if that happens, unfortunately, we have to pack up our toys and go home, and that's not any fun. So I encourage you to think about this want versus need dynamic. If you're raising money out of want, you've got options. You could go out to the marketplace, and if the investors don't like the terms that you're insisting on, then you don't have to raise the money. You could wait. You could do what I refer to as growing into your shoes, grow into your valuation, and then raise money. If you're raising, let's just say $1 million, that's your target, but there's not $1 million worth of interest by investors, well, you could choose to raise less. Nothing bad is going to happen. You just don't get to shift as many gears at the same time. But most startups that I interact with, and most startups that you will get to know, raise money because they need it. If they don't raise money, they otherwise are going to run out of cash. They have to pack up their toys and go home. So I'm encouraging you to just face that reality of, are you raising money out of want or out of need? And that might change over the history of the company. You might be raising money out of need right now. There might be a time in the future that you're raising money out of want. Now, how do you figure out how much money you should raise? Well, I have a very basic formula that I describe quite often, and it goes like this, starting from left to right. The amount of money you raise will afford you a combination of both time and resources. And if you have time and resources, you can accomplish things. And let's call those things outcomes. Now, the time and resources is interesting because if we raise money, we could use all of it to optimize for time, meaning more runway. Instead, we could choose to use all of it for more resources, mostly headcount, but it could also be, big equipment. If you're a hardware company, it could be marketing program spend that you want to dial up. So those are resources. So in truth, this time and resources, they work in opposition to each other, in competition for each other. The more we choose to use the money to gain runway, the less incremental resources we're able to add, and vice versa. So a lot of time that I spend with fundraisers, fundraising founders will be just on that dynamic right there. Have they dialed in the optimum balance of time and resources? I want to focus a lot of energy on these outcomes. That's what you can accomplish. And let me dive in on that a little bit. It's so important that I have this adage that I say all the time. Investors write checks for outcomes, not activities. It's those outcomes, it's those accomplishments that you can gain over time that the investor is first interested in. And that's because as they, give you their money, they want to understand, where is the company going to be in the future when that money runs out? Is the company going to be in a significantly better position to raise money again at a nicely stepped up valuation? And it's those outcomes in the future that will affect the success of the company. So outcomes are things like acquiring companies and opening markets and landing partnerships, reaching interesting financial milestones, those kind of things. Those are outcomes. The activities are a list of how you are going to accomplish the outcomes. So if you make a claim that you're going to acquire your next 100 customers and reach $20,000 of monthly recurring revenue, I like how that sounds, but I might ask you, interesting, how are you going to go about accomplishing that? That's when you're going to move to items like you see on the right. Well, Gordon, the way I'm going to accomplish those two things is I'm going to hire dedicated sales employees. I'm going to crank up our marketing spend because we figured out a good formula for generating leads and closing those leads. See, the things on the right are how you're going to accomplish the things on the left. These outcomes are so important in fundraising that I'm going to strongly suggest that you work the model backwards from the way that I originally explained it. Don't start by dialing in an amount of money and then figuring out what combination of time and resources you can gain with that money and then figure out the outcomes. Go backwards. What outcomes do you need to accomplish over some period of time in order to have a really exciting company? I'm going to come back to that in just a second. But dial in a set of outcomes, then work backwards to how much time and resources will you need to accomplish those outcomes, and then put a price tag on that and work yourself backwards to number 3. That's the amount of money. Okay, I hope this makes sense. Start with the outcomes, work your way back. So what kind of outcomes should you be dialing in? Well, it's a little bit subjective, and this is where you're going to need some help from some advisors to make sure that you are striving for the right types of outcomes. But in a subjective sense, you want outcomes that will allow you to raise money again in the future once you've accomplished those outcomes at a considerably stepped up valuation. What is considerably stepped up? I think double or triple the current valuation would be a nice target to shoot for. Another way to think about it is if you're raising $1 million or $2 million seed round and you believe that will set you up for a Series A round of funding, then you should understand what is it that the Series A venture funds are going to want to see to get them excited to lead that round of investment. So there's another really good one right there. If your next round is a Series A, then you need to be striving for Series A outcomes. Otherwise, the Series A investors aren't going to be interested in your round of funding. All right, hope this is making sense so far. I'm just laying the foundation. But with that as a basic framework, we can stitch together multiple rounds of funding. And let's call the first one a seed round. You raise money, it gains you time and resources, and with those time and resources, you accomplish a set of outcomes. And then in the future, once those outcomes are accomplished, you will use those outcomes to get a step up in valuation, and you'll do it all again for your Series A. You'll raise Series A funding, gain new time and resources, and gain a fresh set of outcomes over time. Once that's accomplished, you'll do it again, and you'll raise your Series B. And this movie keeps playing out scene after scene after scene until you no longer either need money or want money. So there's no magic answer as to how many of these rounds of funding are required. There's no requirement that you raise money in the first place at all. But since you're in this session, I have a feeling that you're interested in fundraising, and this is how this works together. With each set of outcomes, you get a nice step up in valuation.
Gordon, that's great. And we had one question from the audience here that I think fits in nicely here. We talked a little bit about, seed, Series A, Series B, outcome expectations, activities. And you also mentioned, there's a difference between needing and wanting. Someone in the audience kind of has a third category. They said, what about the category of being ready? How do you know you're ready for that first investment? Maybe you're thinking about it less than, I know that I would like to at some point, but the want does not equal preparation. Can you talk to us maybe what are some of the characteristics that you would hope a company that's trying to raise money is ready for? Can you characterize that for us?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And I believe this question is even most appropriate. And I heard it in some of the words, but I'm going to say this. It's most appropriate for that very first round of funding. Okay, that's when it's sometimes ambiguous and it's sometimes uncertain, like is now the time or not? And that's because oftentimes we start off as bootstrappers, right? We can't even work on our startup venture full time because we need to pay the bills, and the startup's not going to pay the bills until it's generating revenue. So we'll start up in some kind of a bootstrap phase where maybe we have a job that pays the bills or a part-time job. And so we'll operate in that bootstrap phase. And during that bootstrap phase, we'll try and put together a solid business plan. We'll go out and do a lot of customer discovery. We're going to go out, hopefully, in that bootstrap phase, going out and talking to a lot of prospective users and a lot of prospective customers, because we want to make sure that we truly are solving a problem that they will pay money to have solved. Along the way, we oftentimes will continue to bootstrap into the product development. We'll develop a prototype or some beta testable thing. So somewhere around there, and I'm speaking more to the dynamics of fundraising in Texas or the center part of the country, not California, but for the center part of the country, once you've got a prototype product and you feel like you've got a reasonably solid business plan and you have talked to a lot of prospective customers or users, that might be the time to think about raising your first round of funding. I'm going to talk in a minute about this pre-seed phase. So this, before we've gotten a product into the market with paying customers, we'll often refer to that as a pre-seed phase. And that's because a seed round of funding is more often now associated with startups that do have a shipping product and a paying customer. But in the pre-seed phase, when you've got a working prototype, it might be a good time to test the waters. It's kind of penalty free if you think about it. If you feel like, here's the one of the first indications. Do you feel like you are ready to jump into this full time? Quit the job and put your energy into this and go get a co-founder or bring one or two other people into this venture. If so, it's likely that you're going to need some amount of funding to do that. Maybe only $50,000 or $150,000, but it's usually that point where if you keep bootstrapping, your venture is going to keep moving so slow that you're going to miss the opportunity. Competitors are going to come out of the woodwork and crush you. And that's oftentimes the pivot point to, all right, I'm going to raise a little bit of funding so I can quit my job and go full time on this.
That's so helpful, Gordon. Appreciate that. I think it's great to hear a little bit about, how do I know internally that we're ready? And I think some of those indicators and signposts are just so helpful as someone is looking internally and they're saying, I have some of that and I don't have some of that. It's just kind of good to know where you land on the spectrum. So that's really helpful. And we actually had one follow-up question to that. And I think this is just really great from Jim Hurdy. He asks a little bit about expectations. So someone says, okay, I have a want. I feel like I'm ready. What can I expect? How much of expectation from investors how much of that is a moving target, and how much of that can founders expect Gordon, to be consistent? Can you talk to us a little bit about expectations from the investor side?
What the investors expect of the company?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, this will come out. Every investor is different. So this is a little bit of the whipsaw that you'll need to be careful of, and especially in the earlier days, because you might be raising money from angels, right? You might have to raise money from 10 or 15 angels. Some of those angels are going to be passive, like they're not going to be involved in the company. Other ones might actually want to be an advisor, whether you give them extra equity or not. If they're an advisor, or if they're a, let's call it an active investor, they are going to be interested in how you're spending their money. So the dialogue and the due diligence that they do before they make their investor commitment, I believe this is where, if you're listening carefully, you will understand what their expectations are. The first thing you're going to hear from them is, do they get excited about the set of outcomes that you can accomplish? And they're going to really want to know what plan you have to accomplish that. For first-time founders, especially first-time founders that don't have much prior business experience, it can be really difficult because they haven't been in that movie before. For first-time founders that have 5 or 10 years of business experience, they would have more experience to know what kind of things work. So the more you have experience in the industry that you're planning to target with your solution, or the more you have experience with the type of product that you're going to build, the more you'll be able to answer those investors' questions during due diligence, and therefore set a proper list of expectations for what you're going to do. Now, having said all of that, it's one of these kind of things that, General Eisenhower, when he was a 4 or 5-star general, said, no battle was won according to plan, but no battle was won without one. So you have to have a plan. Most investors understand it is not going to work out exactly the way you think or predict. Okay. So this is another discussion that you should have with this investor. In other words, a lot of what you're going to have in the early days are theories that still need to be validated. And the investor is actually going to be sizing you up. Are you the type of person that if something's not working out, are you just going to keep trying over and over and over again the exact same thing that is not working? Or are you going to adjust and adapt? Do you have flexibility to find your way? That's one of the expectations that many investors have.
Right. No, that's so helpful. Yeah, it sounds like it's at a high level, a bit of a moving target. That doesn't mean there isn't a target. It means that depending on who you're talking to on the investor side, so there's some components there. So one, who you're talking to, it's going to be a different expectation at the Series B than at the seed stage, for example.
Totally.
Type of investor, who they are, and then also there's the kind of element of which I also would heavily affirm. You want to have a conversation around expectation. Unspoken expectations are usually unmet ones in my experience, and having some level of dialogue around that with the understanding, to your point, Gordon, they might not make them. As a matter of fact, what is the old saying? All models are wrong, but some are useful.
Yeah.
And it's good to have something to be useful. So no, that's really helpful. I've asked a lot of questions, so I don't want to interrupt you too much, Gordon. Please continue.
All right, no problem. Those are really, really good ones. I wrote an article titled "Your First Business Plan is a Huge List of Assumptions." So in the early days, before you even raise that seed round, as you come into the seed round, you are still fraught with assumptions, and those assumptions need to get validated. By the time you get to a Series B, you're not making a lot of assumptions. You are executing on a machine that is working, and you're now shifting another big gear. So yeah, the dynamics of these funding rounds, they change pretty dramatically as you move from stage to stage.
That makes sense.
If things work out the way you're hoping, you should expect to get diluted 25 to 35% with each real round of funding. I'm not talking about a little baby bridge round or a small friends and family round, but a real seed round or a real Series A or a real Series B. You're going to give up 30% of the company, give or take. The range is obviously wide. I'm sure there's examples of somebody that only had to give up 10%, and there's another one out there that had to give up 50%. But I generally assume it's going to be about 30% dilution for each real round of funding. And you know what? Things will work just fine. If you and a couple or a few co-founders divvy things up and you can execute through, let's say, 3 rounds of funding, a seed, an A, and a B, and you build a great company that gets to 100 million in revenue and exits for 500 million, believe me, everybody is going to make plenty of money. Dilution is not your enemy. I always say optimize for growth, not dilution. In other words, you want the best investors, not just the investor that will dilute you the least, okay? 50% of a zero outcome is not very fun. I'd much rather have 5% equity in a $500 million or $1 billion exit any day. Now, this pre-seed round that I talked about before you get a product into the market with paying customers, we often would refer to that as a pre-seed round. Those are excruciatingly difficult. You don't have revenue. You don't have a track record. Everything is a theory pretty much. I hope you've talked to a lot of prospective customers or a lot of prospective users, because then you will have insights and stories. But you know what? For the most part, what you have during a pre-seed round is what I call hope, vision, promise, and potential. HVPP, hope, vision, promise, and potential. That is what you're selling to the investors. And this makes it really hard because even angel investors are only willing to take so much risk. So if you're raising a pre-seed round, it's a special type of angel that you're looking for. I call them hyper-intersected. They're angels that know a lot about something that's in your business plan, hopefully multiple things. Your industry, your business model, your technology, those kind of things. Those are the angels you need for a pre-seed round. Friends and family, why are so many pre-seed rounds funded by friends and family? They are the ultimate definition of hyper-intersected. They might not know your industry or your technology or your product. They know you. They've known you since you've been alive. They love you very much, and they're going to part with some of their money to support you. All right, I won't go into this too much, but your most valuable tool for fundraising is your pitch deck. We don't write 40-page business plans anymore. It's all reflected in either a short, medium, or long version of a pitch deck. There is a typical flow to a pitch deck. You see here what I most commonly see. There are variations, but most of them start with the problem that you're solving and the market you're serving. This is because if the investor is not convinced that the problem you're solving needs to be solved, they don't need to hear the rest of the pitch. If you're solving a problem that needs to be solved, but you know what, it's in a not so great market, it's a small, dinky niche market, that doesn't sound interesting either. So we often start with the problem in the market, and then we get into more of the meat. I've got an article on this titled Pitch Deck Flow, if you'd like to get a little more information on what typically goes into each of those sections. Couple hits on pitch decks, because it's one of the first things you'll put together as you get ready to fundraise. Tell stories, give examples. I mean, it makes it so much more real if you can tell a story about someone or some company that's suffering from the problem you're solving. You want to use large fonts and images and lots of white space on the slide. Why is that? Because you want the investors listening to you, not reading the slide. When I see slides that have a lot of text, my brain can't help itself. I go into reading mode. I'm reading the slides instead of listening to what you're saying. I guarantee anything that you have to say has got to be more important than something you've typed on the slide. So allow that. And then this is a trick that I find. Since we're limited on real estate on each slide, why on earth would you title the slides problem, market, solution, business model, competition, traction? No. What is it you want the investor to conclude on that slide? Make that the title of the slide, okay? And usually it's somewhere on the body of the slide. Just grab it and put it up there as the title. What you're doing is it's almost subliminal. You're suggesting through the title of the slide what the investor should conclude, and you're freeing up some valuable real estate on the slide for other more important things. All right, I've kind of been mostly in the pre-seed and seed phase for a lot of the discussion here. I want to just give you a little hint for fundraising from VCs. There's going to be a point where you're generating $10,000 or tens of thousands of dollars of monthly recurring revenue if you're a subscription type software company. And you could see that you might be raising a round of funding from VC funds in the 6-month to 1-year horizon. That is the time to start building a relationship with them. Don't wait until you're actually launching a fundraising campaign to go reach out to a bunch of VCs. They like to get to know you. They like to track your progress. They like to see if you meet the milestones that you say you're going to meet. They love getting those monthly updates and seeing your progress. If you can get a dialogue with them, you can even just tell them in the beginning, hey, I'm not raising my Series A yet, but I'd like to get to know you and build a relationship to see if what we're working on is potentially of interest to you. And then once you get into that dialogue, you can ask them questions about what would get them excited in terms of traction and other things about your business. If you do that with enough VCs, now you know exactly what outcomes you should be shooting for. Okay, a couple of tips and hints, and then I want to pause and see what other questions we have. So be thinking about your questions. Go ahead and pop them in the chat line for Eduardo to moderate here in just a minute. You're going to have a big dilemma when you are ready to fundraise. Whoever's the chief fundraiser, almost always the person with the CEO title, is going to have to spend a big majority of their time once you launch the campaign. That means the other 4 or 5 hats they were wearing are mostly going to have to come off and be put onto others' heads in terms of operating the business. So for this reason, you want to really carefully plan out your fundraising campaign, since it's going to take 80% when that chief fundraiser actually is running the campaign. You want to be judicious with your time. This is a graphic that's directly out of that book, Startup Success, that I wrote. I described 3 different phases of fundraising. And the first 2 phases that you see here are before you actually are running the campaign. The first phase is kind of a strategy phase. How much money should you raise? Who's likely to be interested? You'll do some early relationship building. That'll help shape it a little bit. And then you get closer and you do have, kind of a proposed set of terms and a better amount of money that seems to be about right. And you take it out for a test drive. And you're test driving to make sure that those terms seem that they're going to be acceptable for a lot of the investors. Then armed with that, now the chief fundraiser dials it up to 80% and you run like hell and try and get that round closed. And I'm telling you, from start to finish of all of this you see here easily takes 6 months. I mean, just asking for money, actually running the campaign sometimes takes 6 months, and it's very painful. You'd love that to only take 2 months if possible. And the only way to have that take 2 months is by spending the upfront strategy and planning time. Momentum is really important. In a seed round of funding, when we're using convertible securities like a convertible note or a safe, they have this attribute called a rolling close, meaning each investor can sign the docs and give you the money, and then you go find the next investor, they give you the money. But when you do that, this rolling close has this weird attribute that no investor wants to be the first investor, because if you're raising $1 million in a seed round and they give you the first 25,000, what happens if you don't raise any more money? Their investment is basically dead, right? So your hardest mission usually in a seed round with this rolling close attribute is going to be to get the first check written, the first couple or few checks. And then I use this analogy about getting someone on the dance floor, right? We've all been at the parties or a club or a wedding reception or something where there's great music, but nobody on the dance floor. Finally, somebody gets drunk enough, some couple does, they get on the dance floor, and about 15 other couples immediately jump onto the dance floor. So you need to use a couple of tools to get those first checks written. The investors often won't tell you that they have first check concerns. They'll give you other excuses. They'll give you hand waves. They'll give you more homework assignments. They'll tell you they want to meet one more time, or they'll tell you they're on pause. They're waiting for an exit that's about to happen. Now, some of those things absolutely could be true, but it could also be a hint that they don't want to be the sucker to write the first check. So one tool that you have is to offer those very first investors in your round some favorable terms. So if you're using a convertible note or a safe, you might give them maybe a slightly higher discount, or maybe both. And when this technique is used, I see that it's often used for the first 10 to 20% of the target amount that you're raising. So for that $1 million seed round that I mentioned, maybe the first $100,000 to $200,000 of investors get these favorable terms. And you would message that to them. And you're offsetting the extra risk that they're taking, but you're trying to get those investors on the dance floor so that other investors after that will feel more comfortable getting on the dance floor. Second big tool is going to use verbal commitments. Even those first 10% or 20% of investors aren't necessarily going to want to write the check just with the favorable terms, but if you'll get them to verbally commit their investment and to allow you to message that verbal commitment to other investors, you can coalesce, cobble together these verbal commits, and then have a virtual check writing party where all 4 or 5 of them make the investment at the same time once they're all verbally committed. And then you're off to the races. So this is how this dance of the rolling close goes. I'm actually writing this as a contribution to the next issue of Texas CEO Magazine. I was working on it earlier today, this concept of the rolling close and the dance. This first 10 to 20%, those first investors, you're going to use tools to get them on the dance floor. Then you're going to go into what I call the grind. And this is where hopefully you have a list of other interested investors, but they just weren't going to be the first investors. And you're going to be very organized, very disciplined, just like a sales process. You're going to have a tracking system. You're going to ask them what is needed, what is it they need to see in order to get excited about writing you a check. And once you get to about that 65% mark, think about it. Now you're on the downhill slope, not just past halfway, but you're at 2/3 the way through the round. So that last piece is where you just try and close it out. You try and carry the momentum into the end. You message the scarcity. You say, hey, we're raising $1 million and we only have $200,000 left. Can I save a slot for you? So you see how the messaging from the beginning to the end can vary quite greatly. All right, a couple more points and then I'm pausing for questions. Investors, a lot of them have ADD, and it's not a medical diagnosis. What it really means is they see lots of deals. Active investors see lots of deals. Now, I might be in an extreme, but I probably see a dozen deals every week without even trying. And so the excitement that the investor might have while they meet with you, it's going to wear off as they see other deals. So you have to find excuses to get in front of them. You need to be religiously sending those updates. Traction progress is probably the best excuse to get back in front of them. And then maybe this is my last slide, I'm not sure, but this is my favorite question when you're with an investor. If they're not giving you a yes, they're giving you some flavor of no, or not really, making a decision, ask them, what is it that you would need to see? The first part of this question is the most important. So, Gordon, what is it that you need to see in order for this to be an exciting investment opportunity for you? It's an open-ended question that lets me voice my concerns, okay? What is it that you need to see is the best question that I have to offer you. I hope that was helpful. Hopefully you can apply some of those tools to your own fundraising success. Let me stop sharing and see what questions you have.
That was really helpful, Gordon. Appreciate that. I think I have been an investor for a number of years and I learned a lot. I'm actually taking notes. So thank you so much, Gordon. That was really, really helpful. We have a couple of questions that's kind of trickled throughout the session. Do you mind if I just read a couple of them towards you so you can answer them?
No problem. Go for it.
Awesome. One that was mentioned, and then someone said, I echo that question. So this one seems to have a lot of interest. Andrew Wynn said, how do you recommend building relationships with VCs? Would you just send them a cold email and hope they read it? Can you talk to us a little bit about, what is the highest return on investment in terms of making that contact?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the good news about VCs is they're easy to find, and it's easy to find out what type of deals they like to invest in because they don't want you to waste their time either. So right on their website, they've got their thesis. What stage of company, what industries or technology areas do they focus in? Things like that. So they're going to make that part easy. So the first part is don't waste your time on just any VC. It needs to be a VC that you could imagine being a good fit. So you're going to read their site and you're going to look at their portfolio, right? And hopefully you don't see a direct competitor because that's going to be a problem. But if you see other companies in your general category, that's a good indication. Now, it's always best to get to a VC by way of introduction. So one of the reasons why you might join an accelerator program or become part of some network or group is because of the network they have of investors and the ability to make an introduction. There's a lot of VCs that if I make an introduction to them, they will take the meeting 100% of the time. I know because I do the same for a whole bunch of investors. There's a lot of investors that I have respect for, that if they make an introduction to me, I'm going to take the meeting no matter what, right? So that is the best. The next best is to work your way through the process. These venture funds, there's a pecking order. The general partners are the ones that make all the ultimate investment decisions, but supporting the general partners, and it's hard to get a meeting with the general partner. There are gatekeepers in place, but that's okay. Take that meeting with an analyst or a principal or a venture associate at a fund. You can have more penalty-free conversations with them, meet with them multiple times, and then they might be the sponsor to then get you a meeting with a partner. Those are some of the tools that I would recommend.
That's really helpful. I appreciate you demystifying that. I think for a lot of our founders who are first-time founders, they might be a little bit intimidated by the process. But knowing that there's, a couple of ways to, not necessarily cheat codes, but hey, if you can find an intro, that would be just really accelerate the speed for you. So that's really helpful. Yep. Another question that we had that I think was just really timely and inevitably was going to come up. Tisha said, COVID is making things difficult right now. How are investors taking COVID-19 and the associated economic effects into consideration when looking at startups?
This is a really deep one, and I'll give you a few thoughts, but I'll mention that I was progressively posting to an article on this exact topic on my website. So on Shockwave Innovations, you'll see one of my more recent articles is fundraising during a pandemic, and you will see time-stamped contributions to that page starting at about mid-March all the way through end of June or early July. So I'm gonna kind of catch you up until now, because it doesn't make sense to talk about what it was like in March, April, and May. The investors are still cautious. The investors are raising the bar versus what they might have invested in before. And by raising the bar, one of the criteria they're going to use would be, are you a startup that happened to be advantaged by what's happening right now, delivery services and telemedicine and distance education, and you can imagine the businesses that have been advantaged by what's happening. So that's one. And then the question is, even if that answer is yes, will they also be advantaged after the pandemic is over, right? So there's this combination of, are you advantaged or not, that's gonna, it's just one of those either fortunate or unfortunate things, right? So that's a big one. I also believe that for startups that were not advantaged, but have been able to hold revenue, meaning maybe you had revenue growth and now it's flat. Flat is the new up for a lot of startups, right? So if you didn't decline, you found some way to scratch and claw and hold some things together. And you know what? After the pandemic is over, you're going to be back onto a very healthy business. I think those are the categories of startups that are getting the best attention from investors. And even with all of that, just realize the balance of negotiating power, has shifted in their favor. So whatever valuation you might have raised money at a year ago, there's going to be a haircut. I'm not saying it's going to get cut in half, but you need to reset your expectations, but you also need to fund your venture. Those are a few thoughts, and you'll see a lot more on that article that I mentioned.
That's very helpful. Appreciate that. I think it's for a lot of people, there was this kind of moment of everyone froze to see how things are playing out. I think some of that is thawing. So it's good to be caught up to how things are looking at this stage of the pandemic. So that's very helpful. One comment that came in pretty early, but I think it is important. Palm King asked for any resources you can recommend to support pre-seed fundraising. It sounds like there's, from Palmer's perspective, there's a decent amount of literature out there in terms of what do you do in Series A. But he was curious about, if you're at that really early stage, maybe friends and family round for you really isn't possible because of a disadvantaged background or whatever it may be. Can you talk to us maybe some pre-seed funding resources?
Boy, that's a tough one. I'll speak a little bit generally. Well, first off, I've published a lot of articles on my site for that phase. So if you happen to go to my site, and I apologize, I realize I'm referencing my site a lot. It's just because I've written a bunch of stuff. But what you might want to do for those of you that are in that pre-seed phase, if you go to my blog page and on the right on the categories, one of the categories is getting started. And getting started is literally like day one blank sheet of paper getting started, but all the way kind of up through that pre-seed phase before you have a shipping product and paying customers, right? So there's a lot of things that are there that hopefully would be helpful. I would say resources that can help you develop a solid business plan. So I would concentrate, whether it's books or articles or white papers or things like that, on writing the business plan, doing good customer discovery. So whichever methodology that you want to use for that customer discovery. So developing your idea, customer discovery, business plan development, including market sizing and things like that. That is the most important. So resources that focus on that is where I'd spend your energy. And a lot of the reason is you want to kill this idea as soon as possible if it is not an idea that could derive a viable company. I'm not saying it has to be a scalable company to $100 million, because that is not the definition of success for all of you. Some of you might want to build a healthy company that gets to a few $1 million of revenue, has happy, enriched employees, happy, loyal customers. That is a great business, right? So, but I'm just talking about getting to viability, right? You want to kill this thing if it doesn't have hardly any chance of being a viable company. And that's what I would focus your energy on in the earliest days.
That's so helpful. I appreciate the encouragement around, at the end of the day, you should not measure your success by the amount of funding you can or did raise. There's some businesses that have completely been bootstrapped.
Totally.
And in other words, have not raised any money.
I hate it when I ask, how are things going? Or how are you doing? Or where's the company? If the first words out of their mouth are, well, we've raised $48 million to date. Like, so what? I don't care. Tell me about reaching interesting financial metrics, happy customers. I mean, believe me, the last exit that I had, we built a company to $55 million in revenue, sold it for $200 million to a Fortune 500. We only raised $16 million, right? So our measure of success was not funding raised. It was building a great company that had a nice exit. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. I think that there's, it's easy to get caught up in the tech crunch was raised or XYZ. And to know that that is maybe some would say a lagging indicator, if an indicator at all of success. It should not be the focus. And if you end up being able to raise a lot of money, that's great if it accelerates the business. But it's easy to confuse the symptoms of success maybe with actual success. So that's very helpful. Appreciate that perspective, Gordon. I know we're right at time here. Gordon, thank you so much.
I enjoyed it. I saw a few questions about connecting with me. Just the main thing in parting, I'll just say, I have to devote almost all of my time, a big majority of my time, to the Capital Factory Accelerator portfolio companies. So honestly, the best way, to get closer interactions with me is get a startup up and running. Hey, and if one of our co-working spaces in Texas is valuable for you, great. We'd love to work with you there and get into the sweet spot of our accelerator. And like, if you build something that's ready for our accelerator, you and I are going to be spending a good amount of time together. And I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, that's great, Gordon. Thank you so much. And a quick note to everyone, please check out Gordon's book, Startup Success. I posted the Amazon link in the chat. I actually just bought it myself. I'm looking at it now, and it has 5 stars from multiple reviews. Gordon, you're clearly an expert on this topic. We really do appreciate you just sharing your wisdom with us, especially in this moment of time where entrepreneurs and founders, they need our support. So we appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Best of luck to all.
Thanks so much. Thank you, team. Appreciate your time.